December 1945. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The snow falls in thick, silent curtains outside the workshop building, muffling the world beyond the wire. Inside, the air smells of machine oil, wood shavings, and something else. Something clean and sharp that takes a moment to identify. Fresh ink on paper. Greta Hoffman stands just inside the doorway, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air, her fingers numb despite the wool gloves someone gave her yesterday. She is 26 years old. She has crossed an ocean as a prisoner, and she is holding a booklet that makes absolutely no sense. The cover reads, in perfect German typescript, Safety Procedures for Workshop Personnel, United States Army, 1945. Beneath it, a detailed diagram shows a woman, hair properly tied back, standing at a workbench with clearly marked safety zones. Greta stares at this image as if it were a photograph from another planet. The supervisor, a middle-aged American man with oil-stained coveralls and patient eyes, watches her face carefully. He says something in English, then switches to halting German. You read first, then work, always read first. Greta's hands begin to shake, not from cold, from something else entirely, something that feels like a dam beginning to crack. For 4 years, she worked on aircraft in Germany. For 4 years, she learned to move fast, think faster, and never, ever slow down long enough to question why her hands were always cut, why her lungs always burned, why girls kept disappearing from the workshop floor. Now, in an enemy prison camp, someone has handed her a safety manual, and she doesn't know whether to laugh or scream. The workshop at Camp McCoy occupies a converted storage building near the western perimeter. It's not large, maybe 40 feet by 60, with high windows that let in weak winter light. The floor is concrete, swept clean, with yellow lines painted to mark walkways and work zones. There are 8 workbenches, each with its own set of tools hanging on pegboards, each tool outlined in black paint so you know exactly where it belongs. There are fire extinguishers mounted every 20 feet. There are eye wash stations. There are signs, so many signs in both English and German. Wear eye protection. No loose clothing near machinery. Report all injuries immediately. Greta walks slowly through this space, as if moving through a museum dedicated to some civilization she's never encountered. The other women in her transport group, 12 German female POWs who arrived at McCoy 3 days ago, cluster near the far wall, whispering. They're all former Luftwaffe support staff, mechanics, technicians, radio operators. They all have the same look in their eyes, confusion mixed with something like fear. Not fear of punishment, fear of kindness, fear of what it means. The supervisor, whose name is Thomas Brennan, calls them together near the front workbench. His German is rough but comprehensible, learned from a grandmother in Milwaukee. He speaks slowly, pointing to different areas of the workshop as he explains. This is where you work on small engine repair. This is the parts cleaning station. Always use the ventilated hood. Always wear gloves when handling solvents. This is the first aid station. If you are injured, even a small cut, you report it immediately. No exceptions. One of the women, a thin blonde named Liesel who worked on fighter plane engines in Bavaria, raises her hand tentatively. Brennan nods at her. In German, she asks, "What happens if we report an injury?" Brennan looks confused by the question. What happens? We treat it. We document it. We make sure you're safe to continue working. If you're not, you rest until you are. Liesel's face does something complicated. She glances at Greta, then back at Brennan. And we are not punished for being injured. Now Brennan's face changes too. Something shifts behind his eyes, some recognition of a gulf he hadn't fully understood until this moment. "No," he says quietly, "you are not punished for being injured. That's why we have safety procedures. To prevent injuries. When they happen anyway, we treat them. That's how it works." The silence that follows this statement is profound. It's the silence of women recalculating everything they thought they knew about how the world operates. Greta looks down at the manual in her hands. It's maybe 30 pages, printed on good paper, bound with metal staples. The cover is slightly stiff, protective. She opens it randomly to a page in the middle. Section 7, Chemical Handling Procedures. There's a full-page diagram showing proper ventilation setup, protective equipment requirements, emergency response steps for different types of chemical exposure. Each step is numbered. Each number corresponds to a detailed explanation in clear, simple German. At the bottom of the page, a boxed warning: "Your safety is our priority. When in doubt, stop and ask." No question is too small. No concern is too minor. Greta's vision blurs. She blinks hard, trying to clear it, but the tears come anyway, hot and sudden. She turns away quickly, mortified, clutching the manual to her chest. But she's not the only one. Across the room, another woman, Margit, who worked in a propeller factory in Stuttgart, has sat down heavily on a wooden stool, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Brennan stands very still, clearly uncertain what to do with a room full of crying German POWs. He exchanges a glance with his assistant, a younger man named Patterson, who looks equally lost. Finally, Brennan says in his careful German, "Take a few minutes. There's coffee in the office. Real coffee, not ersatz. We'll begin the orientation when you're ready. Real coffee." The words land like stones in water, rippling outward. None of them have had real coffee in years. Greta worked at an aircraft maintenance facility outside Berlin from 1941 to 1945. She was 22 when she started, recruited from a technical school where she'd been studying mechanical engineering before the war made such luxuries impossible for women. The facility serviced Messerschmitt fighters and Junkers bombers, hundreds of aircraft cycling through for repair, maintenance, refueling. It was loud, chaotic, dangerous work. The smell of aviation fuel was so constant that Greta stopped noticing it after the first month, even though it gave her headaches that never quite went away. Even though girls sometimes fainted from the fumes and were simply dragged outside to recover before being sent back in. The workshop floor was a concrete expanse the size of a football field, crowded with aircraft in various states of disassembly. The lighting was poor, especially after the bombing campaigns intensified and electricity became unreliable. They worked by daylight when possible, by dim electric bulbs when necessary, by flashlight and lantern when there was no other choice. The tools were shared, inadequate, often improvised. Safety equipment was a joke. There were no manuals, no written procedures, no training beyond what the older women showed the newer ones in hurried demonstrations between shifts. "Watch how I do this. Don't touch that when it's hot. If you smell something sweet, move away fast." That was the extent of it. Instructions shouted over the roar of engines and machinery. Knowledge passed like folklore, incomplete and unreliable. Greta learned to work fast because fast was the only speed that mattered. She learned to ignore the burns on her hands, the cuts that never quite healed, the constant ache in her back from bending over engine compartments for 12-hour shifts. She learned not to ask questions because questions slowed things down, and slowing down meant failing the Reich, and failing the Reich meant consequences nobody wanted to think about. She learned to step over the dark stains on the concrete floor where Hilda had been standing when the fuel tank she was draining had exploded, taking her face and hands and most of her future with it. Hilda survived, technically. They sent her away somewhere. Nobody talked about it. Talking about it would be admitting that the work was dangerous, and admitting the work was dangerous would be admitting that maybe, possibly, something should be done to make it less dangerous. And that was not how things worked. Things worked like this. You showed up. You worked until you couldn't. If you got hurt, it was because you were careless. If you got killed, you were a hero. There was no middle ground, no acknowledgement that maybe the system itself was broken, that maybe women's lives had value beyond their production output. Greta learned not to think about it. Thinking about it made the work impossible. So she didn't think. She just moved, hands flying through familiar motions, mind carefully blank, day after day after day, until the Americans came and everything stopped. The coffee is indeed real. Greta can smell it from across the office, rich and dark and impossibly luxurious. Brennan pours it from a percolator into actual ceramic mugs, not tin cups, and hands them out with the casual ease of someone who has never had to consider coffee a precious resource. There's sugar too, and condensed milk. Greta watches Liesel add both to her mug with trembling hands, watches her take the first sip, watches her face crumple. It's just coffee. It's just a hot drink. But it's also the first time in years that someone has offered them something warm and good without expecting anything in return, without rushing them, without making it contingent on productivity or performance. They sit in Brennan's small office, crowded together on mismatched chairs, holding their mugs like lifelines, and nobody speaks. Outside the window, the Wisconsin snow continues to fall, transforming the camp into something clean and white and almost beautiful. After 15 minutes, Brennan stands and gestures toward the workshop. Ready to begin. They follow him back out, coffee warmed and slightly steadier. He takes them through the orientation methodically, pointing out each safety feature, explaining its purpose, demonstrating its use. This is how you use the eye wash station. This is the emergency shutoff for the ventilation system. This is where we keep the burn treatment supplies. Every explanation is accompanied by a reference to the manual. Page 12 covers this. See Section 4 for more details. You'll find a checklist for this on page 23. The manual is not a suggestion. It's a requirement. Greta keeps touching hers, running her fingers over the cover, flipping through pages. The paper has a slight texture, substantial and real. The diagrams are professionally drawn, clear and precise. Someone spent time on this. Someone thought about what information would be needed and how to present it most effectively. Someone cared whether the people using this manual lived or died. The thought is dizzying. Brennan assigns them to different stations based on their previous experience. Greta, with her aircraft maintenance background, gets placed at the small engine repair bench. The assignment comes with a secondary manual, this one specific to engine work, safety procedures for engine maintenance and repair. It's even more detailed than the general manual, with sections on fuel handling, electrical safety, proper lifting techniques, ventilation requirements. There's an entire chapter on recognizing symptoms of fuel vapor exposure: headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion. If you experience any of these symptoms, the manual instructs: stop work immediately, move to fresh air, and report to medical staff. Do not attempt to continue working. Your health is more important than the task. Greta reads this line 3 times. Your health is more important than the task. It's such a simple statement, such an obvious truth. And yet she has never in 4 years of dangerous work heard anyone say it. Not once. Not ever. The opposite, in fact. The task is everything. The task is all that matters. Your health, your safety, your life. These are secondary concerns, expendable resources in service of the greater goal. She thinks about Hilda. She thinks about Anna, who lost 3 fingers to a propeller blade and was back at work the next week, her hand wrapped in dirty bandages, because there was no such thing as recovery time. She thinks about Clara, who breathed in so much fuel vapor that she started having seizures, and who disappeared one day, and whose name they were told not to mention again. She thinks about her own hands, scarred and calloused and marked with the evidence of 100 small injuries that were never treated, never acknowledged, never considered worthy of attention. And she thinks about this manual, this impossible document that treats her life as if it has value. Brennan walks her through the first task, inspecting a small gasoline engine for a camp vehicle. He does it slowly, referring to the manual at each step, showing her where to find the relevant safety information. Before we begin, we check the ventilation. See, the hood is running, drawing fumes away. We make sure we have proper lighting, no shadows where we might miss a problem. We put on safety glasses, even for inspection work, because debris can fly unexpectedly. We make sure our clothing is appropriate. No loose sleeves, no jewelry that could catch. We review the emergency procedures. Where's the fire extinguisher? Where's the first aid kit? Where's the nearest exit? Only then do we start the actual work. Each step is deliberate. Each step has a reason. Each step assumes that the person doing the work deserves to go home at the end of the day intact. Greta follows along, her movements mechanical, her mind somewhere else entirely. She's thinking about the morning in 1943 when she arrived at the aircraft facility for her shift and found blood on her workbench. A lot of it, and nobody would tell her what had happened, and she was expected to just clean it up and start working. She's thinking about the afternoon when the air raid sirens went off and they were ordered to keep working anyway, because the aircraft had to be ready. And the bombs fell close enough that the building shook and dust rained down from the ceiling. And one of the girls started screaming and couldn't stop, and the supervisor slapped her and told her to be quiet and get back to work. She's thinking about the time she asked for gloves, because the solvent they were using was eating through her skin, and she was told that gloves slowed down the work and she needed to toughen up. She's thinking about all of it, the accumulated weight of 4 years of being treated as if her body was just another tool, disposable and replaceable, and the weight is crushing her. Brennan finishes the demonstration and steps back. Now you try, walk me through the safety check before you begin. Greta opens her mouth. Nothing comes out. She tries again. Her throat feels tight, constricted. She looks down at the manual at the clear, numbered steps. Step 1. Verify adequate ventilation. She looks up at the ventilation hood, humming quietly above the workbench. She looks at Brennan, who is watching her with patient, concerned eyes, and something breaks. She doesn't mean for it to happen. She's been holding it together for days, for weeks, for years. She's been strong and silent and enduring because that's what you do, that's how you survive. But standing here in this clean, well-lit workshop, holding this manual that treats her life as if it matters, being asked to prioritize her own safety before the work, it's too much. The tears come hard and fast, wrenching sobs that shake her whole body. She drops the manual, covers her face with her scarred hands, and cries like she hasn't cried since she was a child. She cries for Hilda and Anna and Clara. She cries for all the girls who got hurt and were told it was their own fault. She cries for the version of herself who learned to accept danger as normal, injury as inevitable, her own body as expendable. She cries because someone just handed her a safety manual and expected her to read it before working, and that simple act of care has revealed the enormity of what was taken from her, what was taken from all of them, what they were taught to surrender without question. Brennan doesn't touch her, he doesn't tell her to stop. He just stands there quiet and steady and waits. After a while he says softly in German, "It's all right, take your time." When she can finally breathe again, when the sobs have subsided into hiccups and shaky breaths, she looks up to find that the other women have gathered nearby. They're all crying too, or have been crying, faces red and wet. Margit is holding her own manual like it's something precious and fragile. Liesel has hers pressed against her chest. They look at each other, these women who were enemies, who were prisoners, who were taught that their pain didn't matter. And they see each other, really see each other, maybe for the first time. Brennan clears his throat. "I think," he says carefully, "that maybe we should take a longer break. There's more coffee. And I think we all need to sit down and talk about some things." They end up back in the office, crowded together, mugs refilled. Brennan pulls up a chair and sits facing them. His face is serious, troubled. "I need you to understand something," he says. "The way you were treated, the way you were expected to work, that was not normal. That was not acceptable. I don't know all the details of your experiences, but I can see the scars. I can see the fear. And I need you to know that here in this workshop your safety comes first. Always. Not because I'm kind. Not because I'm doing you a favor. But because that's the law, that's the standard. That's how civilized people treat workers, any workers, even prisoners, especially prisoners." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "You are POWs. You are under our authority. That means we are responsible for your welfare. That's not optional. That's not negotiable. The Geneva Convention requires it, but more than that, basic human decency requires it. You will not be asked to work in unsafe conditions. You will not be punished for reporting injuries or safety concerns. You will not be expected to sacrifice your health for productivity. If anyone, and I mean anyone, treats you otherwise, you report it immediately. Do you understand?" They nod, silent, not entirely sure they believe him, but wanting desperately to try. Greta finds her voice, rough from crying. "Why?" The question hangs in the air. Brennan looks at her for a long moment. "Why do we care about your safety? Because you're human beings. That's all the reason we need." It's such a simple answer, such an obvious answer, and yet it feels revolutionary. Over the following weeks, Greta learns what it means to work in a place that values safety over speed. She learns to pause before each task and review the procedures. She learns to ask questions without fear of ridicule. She learns to report problems, small and large, and watch them get addressed rather than ignored. She learns that mandatory rest breaks are actually mandatory, that working through exhaustion is not heroic but dangerous, that saying "I need to stop" is not weakness but wisdom. She learns to use the eye wash station when she gets solvent in her eye, and to report it, and to be checked by medical staff who treat it as a serious concern rather than an inconvenience. She learns that when she cuts her hand on a sharp edge, she's expected to stop immediately, clean and bandage the wound properly, and document it in the injury log, which is reviewed weekly to identify patterns and prevent future incidents. She learns that the tools are maintained and replaced when they become unsafe, that the lighting is adequate, that the ventilation is checked regularly, that the fire extinguishers are inspected monthly. She learns that there are rules, real rules, designed to protect workers rather than just maximize output. And slowly, carefully, She learns to believe that maybe, possibly, her life actually does have value beyond what she can produce. The other women go through similar transformations. Margaret, who worked with toxic adhesives in a propeller factory, spends her first week at Camp McCoy just standing at the chemical handling station, reading and rereading the safety procedures, touching the protective equipment, testing the ventilation hood. She tells Greta one evening, voice wondering, that she had 3 friends die from adhesive exposure in Germany, and everyone just accepted it as the cost of war. Liesel, the fighter engine mechanic, becomes obsessed with the tool maintenance schedule. She checks the pegboards constantly, marveling at the fact that each tool has its place, that damaged tools are removed from service rather than just passed along to the next person. She tells Greta that she once watched a wrench break and slash a girl's arm open, and the girl was blamed for using the tool incorrectly, even though the tool was clearly faulty. Another woman, Frieda, who worked in aircraft electrical systems, discovers the lockout-tagout procedures for working on energized equipment and breaks down completely. She had seen a woman electrocuted, had watched her die, had been told it was because she was careless, when in fact there had been no safety procedures at all, no way to ensure power was off before working, no protection beyond hope and luck. The stories emerge slowly, shared in quiet conversations during breaks, in the barracks at night, in the moments between tasks. Each woman carries her own catalog of horrors, her own list of friends and colleagues who were hurt or killed in preventable accidents. And each woman is struggling to reconcile the brutal reality of their past with the careful safety culture of their present. It's not just the physical safety that affects them. It's the psychological shift, the recognition that they were systematically taught to devalue their own lives, that the injuries and deaths they witnessed were not inevitable consequences of wartime necessity, but the results of deliberate choices to prioritize production over people. That their government, their supervisors, their entire system treated women's bodies as expendable resources, and normalized that treatment so thoroughly that they had internalized it, had learned to blame themselves for their own suffering. Greta thinks about this often as she works through the winter at Camp McCoy. She thinks about how easily she accepted the dangerous conditions, how quickly she learned not to question, how completely she absorbed the message that her pain didn't matter. She thinks about how she would have gone on accepting it, would have continued to work in those conditions, would have eventually been injured or killed, and never questioned whether it had to be that way. And she thinks about the manual, the simple act of being handed written safety procedures in her own language, and how that single gesture cracked open everything she thought she knew about her own worth. By spring, the workshop at Camp McCoy runs smoothly. The German POWs have become skilled at following safety procedures, at maintaining equipment properly, at working carefully rather than frantically. They repair engines, fix machinery, do metalwork and woodwork and electrical work, all according to proper protocols, all with adequate protection and oversight. The injury rate is remarkably low. When injuries do occur, they're minor and properly treated. Nobody dies. Nobody loses fingers or eyes or lungs. Nobody is sacrificed on the altar of productivity. It seems like such a small thing, such a basic expectation. And yet for these women, it's everything. One afternoon in April, Greta is working on a carburetor rebuild when Brennan approaches with a new manual. This one is about advanced engine diagnostics. He hands it to her with a slight smile. Thought you might be interested in this. You've been doing good work. Might be ready for more complex repairs. Greta takes the manual, feels its familiar weight. She flips through pages of diagrams and instructions, all in careful German, all designed to help her do better work more safely. She looks up at Brennan. "Thank you," she says. And then, because the words feel inadequate, for everything. Not just the manual, all of it. Brennan's smile fades into something more serious. "You don't have to thank me for treating you like a human being. That should be the baseline, not a gift. But you're welcome anyway." After he walks away, Greta stands there holding the manual, looking around the workshop. The spring sunlight streams through the high windows, illuminating the clean floor, the organized tools, the safety signs in 2 languages. She can hear the other women working, their voices calm and unhurried. She can smell machine oil and coffee and the fresh air coming through the ventilation system. And she realizes that this place, this enemy prison camp, has taught her something her own country never did. That her life has value. That safety is not a luxury but a right. That the women who died in German factories didn't have to die. That their deaths were not noble sacrifices but preventable tragedies. And that the system that allowed those deaths was not strong but monstrous. It's a hard truth to swallow. It means acknowledging that she was complicit in her own exploitation, that she accepted the unacceptable, that she survived while others didn't, partly through luck and partly through her willingness to keep going when she should have stopped. It means recognizing that the regime she served treated her as disposable, and that she knew it, on some level, and worked anyway because what choice did she have? But it also means understanding that there is another way. That work doesn't have to be deadly. That productivity and safety are not mutually exclusive. That caring about workers is not weakness but strength. That a manual printed in German and handed to a prisoner of war can be an act of profound respect, a recognition of shared humanity, a rejection of the idea that some lives matter less than others. Greta opens the new manual to the first page. Section 1. Introduction to Diagnostic Procedures. She begins to read, and as she reads, she thinks about the girls who never got this chance, who never learned that they deserved better, who died believing their deaths were their own fault. She thinks about Hilda and Anna and Clara, and all the others whose names she never learned. And she makes a silent promise to remember them, to bear witness to what was done to them, to never again accept that women's lives are expendable. It's not much. It's not justice. It's not even close to enough. But it's something. And in the clean, well-lit workshop of an American POW camp in Wisconsin, holding a safety manual that treats her life as if it matters, Greta Hoffman begins to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserves to survive. The war ends officially in May. The POWs at Camp McCoy learn about it in stages. First rumors, then confirmation, then the slow, complicated process of figuring out what comes next. For Greta and the other women, the question of return is fraught. Germany is destroyed, divided, occupied. The places they came from may not exist anymore, at least not in any recognizable form. The people they knew may be dead or displaced. The future is uncertain in every possible way. But one thing is certain. They will carry these lessons with them. They will remember what it felt like to work safely. They will remember that there is another way, a better way, a way that values human life over production quotas. They will remember the manuals, the safety equipment, the mandatory breaks, the injury reports, all the small, practical ways that a society can choose to protect its workers. And maybe, in the long, difficult work of rebuilding, they will insist on those protections. Maybe they will refuse to go back to the old ways. Maybe they will teach others what they learned in an enemy prison camp. That safety is not a luxury, that care is not weakness, that every life has value, and that a government that treats its people as expendable has forfeited its right to their loyalty. It's a small hope, but it's a beginning. Greta keeps her safety manuals when she's eventually repatriated. She keeps them through the chaos of return, through the displacement camps, through the slow process of finding a place in the shattered landscape of post-war Germany. She keeps them as evidence, as reminder, as proof that another world is possible. Years later, working in a machine shop in Munich, she will pull them out when a young apprentice asks why she's so insistent on proper safety procedures. She will open them to show the diagrams, the instructions, the careful attention to worker welfare. She will tell the story of the American supervisor who handed her a manual in German and expected her to read it before working. She will explain what it meant to realize that her own government had treated her life as worthless while her captors treated it as valuable. And she will watch the apprentice's face change, watch the recognition dawn, watch the same question form that she once asked. Why? And she will give the same answer Brennan gave her, because you're a human being. That's all the reason we need. It's not a complete answer. It doesn't undo the past or guarantee the future. But it's a foundation, a starting point, a principle worth fighting for. And in a world that has just torn itself apart, that has sacrificed millions on the altar of ideology and power, that has demonstrated the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human courage, maybe that simple principle, that basic recognition of shared humanity, is the only thing worth rebuilding on. Greta Hoffman learned that lesson in a POW camp in Wisconsin in the winter of 1945. She learned it from a safety manual printed in German. She learned it from a supervisor who insisted that her health mattered more than the task. She learned it from the recognition that even enemies deserve protection, that even prisoners have rights, that even in war, there are lines that should not be crossed. And she spent the rest of her life trying to make sure that lesson was not forgotten, because some things are too important to forget. Some truths are too hard to abandon. And the knowledge that every life has value, that safety is a right, that care is not weakness but strength, these are truths worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth passing on to the next generation and the next and the next. In the end, that may be the real story. Not the war, not the camps, not the dramatic moments of suffering and survival, but the quiet, persistent work of building a world where safety manuals are not revolutionary, where protecting workers is not exceptional, where the baseline assumption is that every person deserves to go home intact at the end of the day. It's not a dramatic story, but it's the one that matters, and it started for one German aircraft mechanic with a manual handed to her by an enemy in a prison camp in the winter of 1945.